Bad here.
I think it'd be good if we could sort of start off with just an idea of how this operation got here in the first place, what it appears to have been the story behind that.
I think the reason it came here was because Drambuie just didn't want it at Drambuie, and the next best site was here, and they didn't get nearly as many objections. So it was further away from Plockton, further away from civilization as a rule, and so we've just ended up with it.
It's a huge project for a community this scale. It seems very out of place in a way.
Well, it was the largest project in the world of this type. They built the biggest dock gates in the world, and they built the biggest oil rig in the world. And local labour was only a matchstick in an ocean, really, to what there was.
It's almost like they were swamped.
They were swamped completely, about 3,000 to 1.
How were Howard Doris to work with?
Howard Doris to work with? You didn't work with Howard Doris, you worked for Howard Doris. The workers made Howard Doris because Howard Doris just were incapable of doing anything. Howard Doris were the main contractors, in effect, that they ran the administration, but the whole work was done by subcontractors. And subcontractors, when you have too many subcontractors, the trouble is it then becomes out of hand. And that's exactly what happened. It just became completely out of hand.
You hear a lot about a splendid safety record and only a few men getting hurt. And how was it really?
How was it really? One day I was called an emergency taxi to take a chap to Raigmore, or actually it wasn't Raigmore as it turned out to be, later it was, to take a chap immediately to Inverness. The roads were bad, they knew I had a Land Rover. No taxis available, there's no taxi service up here. So I told Howard Doris the only available transport was a Land Rover. So if I had any valuable equipment, not to use it, obviously. I arrived at the site, and there's a chap came out looking very white who had just had a heart attack. Get him off the site by any means. That was Howard Doris' safety record. That's one example.
The record, I think, holds for about 3 casualties, 3 fatalities, I think?
Perhaps in the rig, but more than 3 people drowned for a start, not including the lorry driver, which makes 4. Somebody crushed in a boat made 5. In total there was 9 I know of.
We've heard some of the people who've worked on it talk about kind of dangers on the job as well, difficulties with falling objects or something.
Falling objects, there was a time when some divers were knocked unconscious with falling concrete, although they had all the necessary signals and flags flying and had been given clearance to dive. There was cases of some severe injuries with falling scaffolding clips. Everything was thrown into the sea, didn't matter what was below. There was cases of some pictures that were done in what was called the centre shaft. That was literally called the suicide chamber. That's what it was nicknamed, and you used to take bets of who could walk across it unhit. And don't forget, you're talking of heights of 200 feet upwards. This was a very big object.
Why was this?
Because I didn't have a clue. That's as simple as that. They tried very hard, but it was very unsuccessful as far as safety went. There was cases once, I was called out to do some safety pictures because a chap had fallen off a pier and drowned, which is one of the ones that seemed to be quietened up again. And I was told, don't take the pictures today, come back in 3 days' time, I've got the jetty cleared up. What use is that? What use is that?
Why did the workforce put up with this kind of situation?
Money. Good money. And that's the long and short of it. Conditions weren't too bad. The food was edible, despite the complaints. In fact, the food was a lot better than a lot of them were getting at home, and yet they would still complain. But the money was excellent. I mean, a tea boy could walk out with £300 a week. Where else in the world could a tea boy earn that kind of money? I was earning upwards of £500 and £600 a week, but I still complained. The result was I ended up out of a job. But then again, I ended back in a job, and out of a job, and out of a job, because I was still very handy to have around, being a good diver.
Okay. Did anybody in the community question the ethics of Howard Doris?
The ethics of Howard Doris weren't actually questioned in the community itself. It was on the site. You heard that, in fact, it was a topic of conversation that Howard Doris their ethics just were non-existent, because everything was, or the saying is, the buck was passed on to somebody else, the contractor or the subcontractor as such, who couldn't make a decision in the long run without the say-so of Howard Doris in the first place. So the ethics, it was made to look as if ethics did exist, but in actual fact, none existed at all. It was very cleverly done in that sense, but no decision at all could be taken. Even the simplest decision could be held up and thousands of pounds wasted daily, waiting for a simple decision of to move this to there, or can we have a cram for 10 minutes? So the ethics were just non-existent, but they were questioned continually.
What about the role of Labour on site?
The role of Labour, well, they were there to do a job. They had done the job very well considering what they had to do it with. There was one main contractor who was Ferguson Haynes, and their men, I've never seen men work like it in my life, quite honestly. I mean, they worked, it was almost like slave labour, but they were capable of doing it. It was all imported labour. A lot of Irishmen, Scots, English, every nationality you could think of. But anybody that worked for Ferguson Haynes either worked or dropped, and they did work.
I wonder why the local community perhaps did not impose more control over the whole thing.
Local community was too interesting in trying to cash in on a short-term project. If you can let a house for £50 a week for 3 years, that you normally only let in the summer at maybe £15 or £20 for an odd short season, the season up here is very short, obviously you'll try and cash in. But the trouble is, the long-term damage it does wasn't foreseen. This is the thing. So therefore, everything was overruled by just this greed for money, short term. So naturally, why would you object? Whereas if they objected at the time, they could have had so much more for so much longer. There was a trust fund set up by Howard Doris at £25,000 a year to go to the community. But there's a catch-22 to this. We only get the money after Howard Doris leaves. All I have to do is keep one man on the site. Eventually the money will disappear. It's at 25 per annum, which just now must be running at close to £100,000. The community is defined as the area at large, which is Ross and Cromarty, which is one of the biggest areas in Scotland. I don't think this area will ever see it. I don't think anybody will ever see the money, quite honestly. And then again, 25,000 stands as a great deal of money, but by today's standard, doesn't even buy a Rolls Royce. Not even one.
What about the role of the local community council and local politicians?
I have a quote from them. When there was, the objections were to go in for the steel yard, which was very cleverly done. It was put in 21 days from date of publish, and during 21 days with the Christmas holidays and New Year holidays, so which made the 21 days became very, very narrow indeed. Plus with the country being struck as it was, and rail being off from here, it therefore meant that about 12 days we could actually write in and complain. But a quote from a councillor was, and this was at a party one night held for a teacher leaving at Shieldig, was as follows: all objections will be automatically overruled in favour of employment. Before the objections are even sent in, they were to be overruled. They weren't even to be listened to, they were to be read, formally or informally, but it was only just a fiasco, really.
It seems as if the community has gotten locked into it now.
Well, if you were in this community, you'd have no choice, you'd be locked in too. There's no way out. It's the old story again. Once again, it's catch-22. You cannot get out of it. There is no way out of it. You either sink or you swim. And if you decide to sink, well, you're just left as you started. You haven't lost anything, but you certainly won't gain anything. And the community as such hasn't really gained anything. I mean, we've gained an eyesore. We're now going to lose the Bialach, or the Pass of the Carter, which is one of the world's most famous landmarks. We're going to build a steel yard at the bottom of it. Tourism was just getting started. We've now ruined it before it's got started. What happens 10 years from now when this site is done and finished and it's still rusting away? What happens then? I mean, 2 years is fine, 3 years is great, 5 years is wonderful, but there is a time when the golden egg must disappear, or it must shatter, then you're back to reality. I mean, reality now is, I'm not working for less than £60 or £70 a week. Shop assistants, 90% of Glasgow doesn't even earn that. At cities in Edinburgh, London don't even earn that. Now it's a case of, I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that. The whole sense of proportion locally has gone mad, completely haywire. Money has just become a commodity to light cigars with, or just to show off with. There's just nothing to do it with.
The whole value system has changed.
The value system hasn't changed, it's just gone crazy. I mean, the things still cost the same, except that now they just don't know what to do with it. I mean, the Scot is supposed to be mean, yet everywhere in the world he is known as the biggest spender. Everywhere gears up for the Glasgow Scottish Fair. Anywhere in the world they know that the Scot is the one who spends money, because he's canny, because he saves his money, looks after it, and he blows it all at once. But now it's a case of he just doesn't know what to do with it. So, and then when it runs out, what then? He's completely at a loss because he just doesn't know how to save.
For communities like Newfoundland, looking at this kind of development, Nova Scotia and so on, what should they learn from what's gone on here?
Learn that they will come regardless of what you say. That inevitably it has to come also, but also that you can state your own terms. You'll get it. It doesn't matter what you want, you'll get it. Britain unfortunately discovered too late that if they doubled and trebled the price of the fields for exploration, they were still queuing at the door. They want oil. It's as simple as that. Shetland learned, unfortunately, a little too late by saying, you will do this and you will not do that. But unfortunately, they learned that too late. They're now getting it their own way, and the community is benefiting. The whole point of oil, and especially North Sea oil, and anywhere in the world, is to benefit people. But the only ones that seem to be benefiting are the money mongers. This is the whole point. Nobody else seems to be benefiting from it. I mean, there was, at one time, 4,000 workers. Some bought houses, some drank it. But where was the actual benefit of it to this community, to Ross and Cromarty, to Scotland? There was none. Not really. Oh, you're left with an eyesore. The money was American or French or German. Doesn't matter where it comes from. That's where it's going back to.
Yeah. There's the cat. Is that your cat? Isn't he gorgeous? Wondering what's up?
A fat cat.
I think one of the things that I find hard to cope with a bit is the fact that people are so tied into these swings, and they get to the bottom and they hope for this thing to come back again. It's like waiting for, I don't know what, your ship to come in.
They geared themselves up to praying for a second order. If this second order had been a year later in coming, they would have learned perfectly then, and they would just be right, because the money would have gone. The tourism, they would realise, was their main source of income, as it was just happening to be. But as a result, it's just been a little too early. They're now, the Klondike's back. But I don't think it's going to be the Klondike it was the last time, because the locals not only learned, so did the management, or they should have. I mean, a company that say they're going to employ 1,000 people and then employ 3,000. There's either something wrong with the council or something wrong with the actual contractor himself. They're either blatant liars or just blatant fools.
It seems to be, though, the story of this industry. In Norway, the same thing happened. It's denied.
Nobody seems to learn. Nobody seems to want to learn. All they want is a short-term, quick Klondike. I mean, throughout history, it's always been the same. No matter if you go back to the Hittites and even earlier, to 5,000 years ago, there were the Klondikes then, but they were all very short-lived. Very, very short-lived.
It doesn't certainly seem to be the kind of an industry to build development on.
Development doesn't exist, because there will be eventually a time where you can't get moving in the sea for oil rigs. There is a time, the time has come, when the Arabs have no more wells to sink. There's a time when the last barrel will flow. What then? I mean, shouldn't the money be ploughed into harnessing something else? I mean, okay, it's necessary just now, but there's millions and millions of pounds we go into research instead of wastage, because millions of pounds in this are wasted, dropped to the bottom of the sea, unnecessary boats hired. All this we're going to research to harness other power. They're now talking about wave power. This should have gone on 20 years ago. All this would be unnecessary now.
We hear so much about the high level of technology, and yet so much of the actual construction seems to be faulty.
Faulty construction. The Ninian Central Platform was something incredible. In technology, we go to the moon, we send things round Mars, we don't even know what's in the sea. We don't even know there's still uncharted areas on this planet. We don't even know our own history, but we want to find out the moon's history. But this is mankind, and mankind is such. But it's one of these things that will never change.
You're not a Luddite,
Yeah,
I think, was it, opposed to development.
No, I'm all for development. In fact, I've even helped development over the years by working in building sites. In fact, I've worked on every Scottish oil rig site there's been so far. But the thing is, it's ruined by two words, and that's thoughtless planning. It's just not thought out properly.
Is it the kind of industry that cannot be thoughtfully planned?
Oh no, of course not. I mean, there have been some good amongst the bad. I mean, Andock was well thought out. The Hunterson Oil Project